Hey everybody, and welcome back to the 2022 into 2023 edition of my top 100 board games of all time. So we're going to continue today by counting down through 80 to number 71, and we have a huge 5 new entries in this bracket. Before I get started on the games though, I want to give a shout out to the show sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to and the best online retailer here in the UK. Have some brilliant loyalty schemes, and if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. But let's get on with the games. At number 80, I have Brazil Imperial. So this was a game I was very apprehensive about when I first heard about it, because in the past I have been promised Euro 4X style games, and every single time those games have fallen short of the mark. But Brazil Imperial completely blew that theory out of the water, because this game does what it promises. So this is a very Eurofied resource management style game, but you are traveling around the map, you're building up your military, building new buildings, new infrastructures, trying to reach these public objectives. I'm getting new technologies. Just tons that you can do in this game. And the fact that it's all boiled down into a very simple user interface and into around 100 minutes to play, I think is a great little recipe for a fun Euro X style game. So yeah, I love the way this game develops. It really does tick along at a great pace, and every single obstacle that games like this tend to introduce, making games feel a bit slower and start to churn at a slow pace, Brazil seems to do away with that and just keep things ticking along. So yeah, very impressed by this game, excited to play more of it, and it's just a very fun and a pretty accessible experience considering how much is going on here. So that is Brazil Imperial at number 80. At number 79, I have Akropolis. So this is a brand new game. It only came out in 2022, and this was one that I really didn't know much about before actually getting it to the table. But boy, am I glad that I took a punt on this one, because this game is fantastic. So this is a puzzly tile placement style game as you're laying out these tiles, which are in quite an interesting shape because it's essentially like 3 hexes stuck together in like a triangle formation. And each of those different departments of those tiles are going to have a different colour on them, or some of them are going to have the same, but all of these different colours are going to relate to a different scoring criteria. So for example, you want the yellow tiles to be in isolation, you want the blue tiles all to be conjoined together and your biggest surface area is going to score. You want the red ones to be on the border of the board, and so on. But I love the scoring system in this game because all those different criteria are not going to score unless you invest in getting these multipliers. So I love that trade-off between, yes, I want loads of this, but I also want the multipliers to go with it. And it all ties together through a pretty interesting draft system where you have to spend resources to skip over tiles that you don't want to get to the ones that you do want. And the fact that you have to kind of restock your ability to pass on tiles is interesting, because you can actually stack on top of existing tiles you've already placed down to not only increase your multiplier when it comes to scoring, but also to give you stone, to give you the ability to pass more. Just a very accessible family weight game. You can kind of up the ante in terms of the complexity if you want to, but this is just a brilliant depth to time ratio. It takes around 20 minutes to play, which I think is remarkable. And yeah, just never had a bad game of this one. It just seems to tick a lot of boxes for me, and I'll happily get this one off the shelf anytime, anywhere. So that is Akropolis at number 79. At number 78, I have Memes, which is a very strange game about running a successful ant colony, or not successful if you're me. This is a worker placement style game where you are trying to build up your army of ants. You are going onto the surface and killing different beetles and bugs to harvest them as food, because every round you're going to have to feed your workers. You are trying to spread your pheromones around the map to travel around faster, to get more resources, to improve your colony. So you have a lot of cool things going on here, and you're also trying to reach towards these public objectives. Now this is a very tight game. You have a very small margin for error in this one, which is why I am so terrible at it. But every time I go back to this one, I just want to improve on my previous score. And it's just an interesting design. And I think, with so many games out there, it's very difficult for games to stand out amongst the pack. But Mimi's managed to do that, not only because of the actual mechanisms of the game, but because of the skin and theme of it as well, because I really do feel like running an ant colony is a massively underexplored kind of area or theme, left to be discovered really. So that is Memes at number 78. At number 77, I have Hanamikoji. So this is a game that's actually been on my top 100 for a massive 5 years now and has placed as high as number 17. And I still do consider this one of my favourite games of all time and definitely one of the best two-player only games of all time. I don't think there are as many games that reach the level of sophistication, delicate balance and nuance as Hanamikoji does. So this is an I split, you choose style game where you are trying to gain control over these different geisha girls by taking one of 4 actions when it comes to your turn. The deck of cards is very small, and this is another game where if you make one mistake, that can cost you very dearly. So you are either kind of saving cards back, you are deleting cards from the round, and the other 2 options are to use that I split, you choose mechanism where you give your opponent some options, they take what they want, and then you take the remainder of those cards. And I love that pure tension of that decision. And I love the level of kind of poker face that you need to put on here, because sometimes you'll be leaving your opponent options just praying that they will take the one card that you've left for them so that you get the remaining ones, because you might have a little trick up your sleeve with your remaining actions. This is definitely a game that gives bigger and bigger rewards the more you play it, especially with the same person, because there is a kind of a meta game that starts to develop here. Just a game that when you first play it, it might not seem that there's as much going on as there actually is behind the scenes, but the more you play it, you will start to kind of unravel those levels. Just a brilliantly executed two-player game. That is Hanamikoji at number 77. At number 76, I have Vikings. So Vikings is a medium lightweight drafting and tile placement style game designed by Michael Kiesling. And this game feels quite unlike anything else out there, because when you are drafting these tiles, you are drafting them in relation to a meeple at the same time. And these meeples are going to represent the Vikings, and they all come in different colours and have a different role to play. So for example, some of them are purely going to score you victory points, some of them are going to give you more income, some of them are going to protect you against these invading hordes, and it's all about striking a balance between all of them and having the place for them when you draft, because if you don't have that place for them, they're going to go and sit in reserve for a while, and you have to invest in getting these boatsmen to ship them to their relevant space, which can take time and effort. This is just a really fun, breezy style game, but with a ton of decisions to be made. I love this drafting system, as the more you draft, the cheaper things can become, and you have to kind of squeeze your opponent at times and force them to make moves to make things cheaper for you. And yeah, this game definitely strikes a balance between, you know, the depth, the complexity and the length, and I just think it is a fantastic family weight style game that should be more accessible. So that is Vikings at number 76. At number 75, I have The Resistance Avalon. Now this was actually my number 1 a massive 6 years ago, because I think there's a time in most gamers' lives when they're introduced social deduction games and are just completely mind blown by that concept. And I was certainly in that camp, and you know, all these years later, I still think this game is incredible and still by far my favourite social deduction game. So in this game, you are going to be distributing out these random roles. Half of them are going to be good, you know, half of them are going to be evil, and then it's all about trying to wean out those evil players, because they are trying to sabotage these missions that you are going on, and even electing the players to go on. And I just love the synergy for all the different roles here. You know, some players, all the players have a small piece of the puzzle, and you're trying to share that without being too obvious, I suppose. You know, a little bit of savviness here, a little bit of intrigue, and all that good stuff that you want from a social deduction game. Some of the specific roles I think are fantastic, such as the Merlin role, who actually knows who all the bad guys are, but if he is a bit too obvious with what he knows, then the assassin is going to have a shot to try and kill the Merlin player, and if he's successful, then the bad guys are automatically going to win. Just little twists like that just take this game above the rest for me, and I still think it is an absolute great one. I'd love to play this one more, but sadly I don't have that much opportunity to get a lot of my friends together. You know, you want at least 6 or 7 players to play this one, but still, when I do, I'm definitely going to try and advocate getting this one to the table, because it is brilliant. So that is The Resistance Avalon at number 75. At number 74, I have Awkward Guests, which is by far my favourite pure deduction style game out there. And the thing I love about this more than a lot of the other deduction games is how logical it is and how tangible the evidence is, because you have a physical blueprint of a building, you know where the crime scene is, and it's all about trying to work out how it happened through the use of these cards that you're picking up each round. Some of these cards are going to hold much more pertinent information than the others. Like some might say, A witness might say, well, I saw this person travel from this room to this room, or maybe this type of weapon was used to kill the victim. Therefore, I can tick off all these things that I know it's not. And it's all about trying to squeeze down to the answer as quickly as you can. But when you start adding in these extra variables, such as you can have lies in the mix, you can have, like alibis and, different people colluding together, it really does make the game come alive. And I just love that final piece when you string everything together, you work out who's lying, who's not, who is telling the truth, and just, getting the concrete evidence. And that mixed with the idea of the player interaction where you can actually trade information with other players based on the value of that information. So you might say, well, I have this really strong bit of information here, but I know it's not quite linked to the murder because I have this other information. But my opponent doesn't know that, so therefore I'm going to give them this information, hoping they'll think it's relevant, and they'll give me something really relevant back. Just a very clever game. The setup's a little bit tedious, but it's definitely worth it in terms of the payoff. So that is Awkward Guests at number 74. At number 73, I have Fayum, which has only fallen a single place. So it's definitely holding its own in my rankings. And I was quite surprised by that because I wasn't sure how this one was going to go because it is a really weird game. So on the face of it, this does have a lot of shared DNA with a game like Concordia, where you have a hand of cards, you're playing through them to take the actions, and then as a single action, you can pick them back up into your hand. However, the twist on this one is you actually only pick up the first few cards for free, then everyone after that you have to pay a coin for. So that does add this whole new dimension into the game where you have to think about which cards am I willing to kind of get rid of, and which order am I going to play these cards in, because I want to be making sure that the cards I want to exploit again and again are the last ones I've played, so I don't have to pay for them. And all the time you are drafting new cards into your hand, much like a game like Power Grid. It uses that same kind of refresh system and that numbering system, and it's just a genius combination of mechanisms, actually very simple mechanically, but there's a ton of things going on here as you're developing roads and cities, plantations, tons of things going on. And all of these cards kind of work in a different way. Some of them will offer you big scoring opportunities. And it's all about, again, that hand management system that I think is absolutely genius. Definitely a game you need to see in practice to understand how it works, and one that's going to take a game or two to get out your system and to understand what you're trying to achieve, but another game that's completely worth it. So check out my review if this one intrigues you, because it is definitely an interesting game. So that is Fayum at number 73. At number 72, I have Peloponnes. So Peloponnes, on the face of it, is a stripped back Civ style game as you are trying to acquire these tiles by bidding on them and then add them to your little kind of tableau, I suppose. The tiles are going to come in two different types, one of which is going to give you just the kind of raw resources, your stone, your wood, your food, etc. And the other ones are ones you're going to spend these resources on to get your victory points and so on. But I love the delicate balance here because you want to be making sure you're getting victory points from the tiles you're buying, but you also want to be keeping your population strong, because the strongest of the two different criteria at the end of the game will be your final score. So you can't neglect one over the other. And I also love the twist on this game, and a lot of people aren't going to like this because this is a very punishing game, but at the end of every round you're going to flip over these two tokens, which are all going to correlate to a disaster. And as soon as there are 3 tokens of the same type revealed, then that disaster is going to strike and hit you quite hard. It could be things such as losing a third of your food. You're going to need food because if you can't feed your population, then they're going to die. You're going to lose a third of your population. You're going to have to spend resources for every tile you've collected. All these kind of things. So it's all about that damage mitigation, trying to ride the storm and come out as strong as possible. And I kind of tend to enjoy that pressure. And Peloponnes is definitely one of the most punishing games I have, but I love it for that reason. So that is Peloponnes at number 72. And the final game I'm talking about this episode, at number 71, I have Luna by Stefan Feld. Now this has fallen quite considerably from last year. It was ranked at number 46, but I think a big part of that is because I haven't had the chance to get it to the table, and it's certainly at the top of my priority list. But this is an area control style game as you are controlling these bunch of acolytes, I suppose, and they're going to be dotted around all these different islands, and these islands are going to have a distinct use, and they're all going to have an item assigned to them. And all these items are going to let you kind of break rules and things by letting you shift things around and letting you, rejuvenate your workers if you've already used them. And it's all about trying to string these actions together as much as you can, and then get your disciples into the temple and start generating points, I suppose. But these different areas within the temple have a number on them. And when you put your worker on a number that's higher than the surrounding numbers that players might already be on, then you're going to kick them off, ready for those to be used again in different ways. So it's actually a very clever game, one that's a bit weird. It's definitely esoteric and you have to think a bit differently, but and it's one of those games as well where you start earlier in the game not being able to do much, but by the end of it you can end up stringing these huge things together and just pulling off these big moves and playing as optimally as you can. Definitely feels way different to a lot of other Feld games, and that's probably what I like about it. I love Stefan Feld. Spoiler alert, you are going to see more of his games on this list, but Luna does stand on its own and feels different to the rest of them. So yeah, love this one. It's a fantastic game, and I said I really need to play it again, but that is Luna at number 71. So there we have it. Those are another 10 of my favourite games, and hopefully you've enjoyed the video, because I thought this game had a really cool mix of games here, and all ones that are quite different and not often talked about. If you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.